He always walked through the Boston Common at exactly 7 with his loyal golden retriever beside him, every morning, without fail. But today the dog came back alone, soaking wet, leash dragging, eyes full of fear. What happened to the man who never broke routine? And what secret led him off his path that morning? Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The autumn rain fell steadily over Boston that October evening in 1904, turning the cobblestone streets into mirrors that reflected the warm glow of gas lamps. Miss Catherine Hartwell stood beneath the awning of her small flower shop on Beacon Street, watching the carriages pass by with their horses' hooves creating a rhythmic melody against the wet stones. She pulled her woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders, her green eyes troubled as she stared down the street toward the direction of the harbor. Catherine was 26 years old, with auburn hair that she wore pinned up in the fashion of the day, and a face that held both beauty and determination. She had inherited the flower shop from her late aunt 2 years prior, and had built a modest but respectable life for herself in this bustling city. Her hands, though delicate in appearance, were strong from years of arranging bouquets and tending to the plants that filled her shop with color and fragrance. Today, however, the usual peace she found in her work had been shattered by an event that troubled her deeply. Her neighbor, Mr. Robert Fitzgerald, had failed to return from his morning walk with his beloved golden retriever, Wellington. What made this disappearance particularly disturbing was that Wellington had returned alone just after noon, his leash trailing behind him, his fur damp from the rain, but his master nowhere to be found. Robert Fitzgerald was a creature of habit, a gentleman in his early 50s who had lived in the apartment above the bakery next door for the past 15 years. Every morning at precisely 7 o'clock he would emerge with Wellington and walk the same route through the Boston Common, returning by 8 to open his small bookshop on the corner. He never varied from this routine. He never left Wellington alone. The bond between man and dog was something the entire neighborhood had come to recognize and admire. Catherine had found Wellington sitting outside her shop, whimpering softly, his brown eyes seeming to plead for help. She had taken him inside, dried him off, and given him water, but the dog refused to settle. He paced back and forth near the door, occasionally letting out a low, mournful howl that sent chills down her spine. As the afternoon wore on and Robert failed to appear, Catherine's concern grew into genuine alarm. She had spoken with Mrs. O'Brien, the baker's wife, who confirmed that she had seen Robert leave that morning as usual. She had checked with the postmaster, with the grocer, with everyone along Robert's usual route. No one had seen him after his departure. By evening, Catherine had made her decision. She closed her shop early, secured Wellington with a length of rope, and made her way through the rain-soaked streets toward the offices of the Boston Police Department. The building stood imposing and gray on Berkeley Street, its windows glowing with lamplight as officers went about their evening duties. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of tobacco smoke and wet wool. Officers moved about with purpose, their voices creating a low hum of conversation. Catherine approached the front desk, where a sergeant with a thick mustache looked up from his paperwork with an expression of polite inquiry. "Good evening, miss. How may I assist you?" "I wish to report a missing person," Catherine said, her voice steady despite the anxiety coursing through her. "My neighbor, Mr. Robert Fitzgerald. He left this morning with his dog and never returned, but the dog came back alone." The sergeant's expression shifted to one of mild concern. "How long has he been missing?" "Since this morning. He left at 7 o'clock, as he does every day without fail." "I see. Well, miss, it's only been half a day. Perhaps he simply decided to extend his walk, visit a friend, attend to some business." "You don't understand," Catherine interrupted, her frustration beginning to show. "Robert Fitzgerald never deviates from his routine. Never. And he would never, under any circumstances, leave Wellington alone. The fact that the dog returned without him means something is terribly wrong." The sergeant opened his mouth to respond, but a voice from behind Catherine cut through the conversation. "I'll take this case, Sergeant Morrison." Catherine turned to find herself facing a tall man in his early 30s, with dark hair slightly damp from the rain and striking blue eyes that seemed to take in everything about her in a single glance. He wore a well-tailored dark suit beneath his overcoat and carried himself with an air of quiet confidence that immediately commanded attention. "Detective Harrison Blake, miss," he said, extending his hand. "I couldn't help but overhear your concern. A man who never leaves without his dog, and yet the dog returns alone. That is indeed curious." Catherine shook his hand, noting the firm but gentle grip. Catherine Hartwell. I own the flower shop on Beacon Street. Mr. Fitzgerald is my neighbor, and I'm very worried about him. Harrison studied her face for a moment, and Catherine found herself unable to look away from those penetrating blue eyes. There was intelligence there, and something else, a depth of understanding that suggested he took her concerns seriously, when others might have dismissed them. Why don't you come with me to my office, Miss Hartwell, and you can tell me everything you know. Every detail, no matter how small it might seem, could be important. He gestured toward a staircase, and Catherine followed him up to the second floor, Wellington padding along beside her. The detective's office was modest but organized, with shelves of books lining one wall and a large desk positioned near the window overlooking the street. Rain continued to patter against the glass, creating a sound like distant applause. Harrison removed his overcoat and hung it on a stand near the door, then pulled out a chair for Catherine before settling himself behind the desk. He produced a notebook and pencil, his movements precise and economical. Now, Miss Hartwell, tell me everything about Mr. Fitzgerald. Start with his habits, his routines, anything that might help me understand who he is and why his disappearance is so out of character. Catherine took a deep breath and began to speak, describing Robert's punctual nature, his devotion to Wellington, his quiet but friendly demeanor with the neighbors. She explained how he had inherited his bookshop from his father, how he lived alone since his wife had passed away 5 years earlier, how he seemed content in his solitary but orderly existence. Harrison listened intently, his pencil moving across the paper in quick, neat strokes. Occasionally, he would ask a question, each one sharp and insightful, revealing a mind that was already working to piece together the puzzle. Did Mr. Fitzgerald have any enemies that you know of? Harrison asked. Anyone who might wish him harm? None that I'm aware of. He was well liked in the neighborhood, a quiet, gentle man who loved books and his dog and little else. Family? A sister in Philadelphia, I believe. They correspond regularly. Business troubles? Debts? Catherine shook her head. His shop does well enough. He's not wealthy, but he's comfortable. I've never heard him speak of financial difficulties. Harrison leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant as he considered the information. And Wellington? The dog returned alone, you said. Was there anything unusual about his appearance? Any signs of distress beyond the obvious anxiety of being separated from his master? His fur was wet from the rain and his leash was still attached. But I noticed something else. Catherine paused, reaching down to lift Wellington's right front paw. There's mud caked between his toes, but it's a darker, richer mud than what you'd find in the common. And there are small burrs caught in his coat, the kind that grow along the waterfront near the docks. Harrison's eyes lit up with interest. He rose from his chair and knelt beside Wellington, examining the dog carefully. His long fingers moved gently through the golden fur, and Catherine noticed how tender he was with the animal, despite his obvious focus on the investigation. You're very observant, Miss Hartwell, Harrison said, looking up at her with an expression of genuine admiration. These details could be crucial. The docks are not part of Mr. Fitzgerald's usual route, you say? Never. He always walks through the common, along the same paths every day. He has no business at the waterfront that I know of. Harrison stood, his mind clearly racing through possibilities. Then something, or someone, led him away from his routine this morning. The question is whether it was by choice or by force. He moved to the window, gazing out at the rain-darkened city. Catherine watched him, noting the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the way his jaw tightened with determination. There was something magnetic about Detective Harrison Blake, something that went beyond his obvious good looks and commanding presence. It was the intensity with which he approached this case, the immediate commitment he showed to finding a man he had never met. I'll begin investigating first thing in the morning, Harrison said, turning back to face her. I'll visit the common, trace Mr. Fitzgerald's usual route, and then expand the search to the waterfront based on the evidence Wellington has provided. But I must ask, Miss Hartwell, why did you take such immediate action? Most people would have waited longer before involving the police. Catherine met his gaze steadily. Because I know Robert Fitzgerald. I know that something terrible must have happened for him to be separated from Wellington. And because in this city, with all its bustle and crowds, it's easy for one quiet man to disappear and be forgotten. I couldn't let that happen to him. Something shifted in Harrison's expression, a softening around his eyes that suggested her words had touched something within him. You're a good neighbor, Miss Hartwell. Mr. Fitzgerald is fortunate to have someone who cares enough to act on his behalf. Will you find him, Detective Blake? Catherine asked, voicing the fear that had been building in her chest all day. Will you find him alive? Harrison stepped closer, and Catherine was suddenly aware of how tall he was, how his presence seemed to fill the small office. Yet, despite his size and obvious strength, there was nothing threatening about him. Instead, she felt oddly reassured by his nearness. I will do everything in my power to find him, Miss Hartwell. That is my promise to you. And I've found that in cases like these, time is of the essence, which is why I'd like to begin tonight, if you're willing to help me. Tonight? But it's nearly dark, and the rain is exactly why we need to move quickly. Any physical evidence left at the scene of Mr. Fitzgerald's disappearance will be washed away if we wait until morning. I need you to take me to his apartment, show me his belongings, help me understand his life. And I need Wellington. Dogs have remarkable memories and instincts. If we bring him along, he might be able to show us something we'd otherwise miss. Catherine felt a flutter of nervousness in her chest, but she nodded. Of course. Whatever you need. I have a key to his apartment. He gave it to me last year when he went to visit his sister. Asked me to water his plants and check on things. Excellent. Harrison reached for his overcoat and began buttoning it swiftly. We'll start there, examine his rooms, see if there's anything that might explain where he went or why. Then, if Wellington is willing, we'll venture out into the rain and see if he can lead us to his master. The rain had intensified by the time Catherine and Harrison emerged from the police station, with Wellington walking between them on his leash. The gas lamps cast wavering pools of amber light across the slick cobblestones, and the few pedestrians still on the streets hurried past with their heads bowed against the weather. Catherine pulled her shawl over her head, but the detective seemed unbothered by the downpour, his focus entirely on the task ahead. They made their way through the winding streets of Boston, past brick townhouses with their windows glowing warmly from within, past shops that had long since closed for the evening. Wellington walked with purpose, occasionally pulling at the leash as if eager to begin the search for his missing master. Catherine found herself stealing glances at the detective beside her, noting how his profile looked almost sculptural in the lamplight, how his stride remained confident and steady despite the treacherous footing. Robert Fitzgerald's apartment was located above the bakery on Beacon Street, accessed by a narrow staircase that ran along the side of the building. Catherine produced the key from her reticule, her hands trembling slightly as she fitted it into the lock. Whether from cold or nervousness, she couldn't say. Harrison noticed her difficulty and gently placed his hand over hers, steadying it until the key turned smoothly. "Thank you," Catherine murmured, acutely aware of the warmth of his touch even through their gloves. "Of course, Miss Hartwell. This must be difficult for you, entering your neighbor's home under such circumstances." They climbed the stairs, Wellington bounding ahead eagerly, and entered the apartment. Harrison struck a match and lit the gas lamp near the door, flooding the small space with light. Catherine had been here before, but tonight everything felt different, charged with an almost unbearable tension. The apartment consisted of 3 modest rooms, a sitting area that doubled as a study, a small bedroom, and a compact kitchen. Books lined every available wall, their spines creating a patchwork of colors and textures that spoke of a lifetime of collecting. Harrison moved through the space with methodical precision, his keen eyes taking in every detail. He examined the desk first, noting the neat arrangement of papers, the uncapped inkwell with the pen laid beside it, a half-written letter addressed to Robert's sister in Philadelphia. He was interrupted, Harrison observed, picking up the letter carefully. "The ink is dry, but the letter is incomplete. He must have been writing this morning before his walk and intended to finish it upon his return." Catherine came to stand beside him, reading over his shoulder. The letter was ordinary enough, discussing the weather and asking after his sister's health, mentioning a new shipment of books he had received for the shop. Nothing seemed out of place or alarming. "Look at this," Harrison said, pointing to a line near the bottom of the page. He writes, "I received a most curious letter yesterday from an old acquaintance. I cannot quite make sense of it, but I intend to make inquiries. Does that mean anything to you?" Catherine shook her head. "No. He never mentioned receiving any unusual correspondence." Harrison began searching the desk drawers, his movements careful but thorough. In the 3rd drawer, beneath a stack of invoices and receipts, he found what he was looking for. It was a letter, written in an elegant but somewhat shaky hand, dated 3 days prior. "Miss Hartwell, look at this." Harrison said, holding the letter up to the light so they could both read it. The letter was brief and cryptic. Dear Robert, the past has a way of catching up with us all. I have information regarding the matter we discussed 30 years ago. Meet me at the old warehouse on Pier 7 tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock. Come alone. We must speak of what was buried. Your old friend, Charles Pemberton. Catherine's breath caught in her throat. Pier 7. That's near the waterfront, where Wellington had the mud on his paws. Precisely. Harrison's expression was grim. It appears Mr. Fitzgerald did go to this meeting, and something went wrong. But what matter could be so important that it was discussed 30 years ago and remains relevant today? And who is Charles Pemberton? Catherine asked. I've never heard Robert mention that name. Harrison folded the letter carefully and placed it in his inner coat pocket. That's what we need to discover. But first, we need to search the rest of the apartment. There may be other clues that will help us understand what we're dealing with. They continued their examination, moving into the bedroom. It was Spartan but comfortable, with a neatly made bed and a wardrobe containing Robert's modest collection of clothing. On the bedside table sat a photograph in a silver frame, and Harrison picked it up, studying it intently. The photograph showed a much younger Robert Fitzgerald, perhaps in his early 20s, standing with a group of 4 other young men. They were dressed in the fashion of the 1870s, their faces serious as was customary for photographs of that era. On the back of the frame, written in faded ink, were 5 names: Robert Fitzgerald, Charles Pemberton, James Blackwood, Henry Thornhill, and William Sterling. 5 friends, Harrison murmured. And now, 30 years later, one of them reaches out to Robert about what was buried. This is becoming more intriguing by the moment. Catherine felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp air seeping through the windows. Detective Blake, do you think Mr. Fitzgerald is in danger? Real danger, I mean. Harrison turned to face her, and in the soft lamplight, his expression was both serious and reassuring. I won't lie to you, Miss Hartwell. The circumstances are concerning. A secret meeting, a cryptic message about the past, a disappearance. But we have advantages. We have Wellington, who can lead us to where his master went. We have this letter, which gives us a starting point. And we have each other, your knowledge of Mr. Fitzgerald and my experience in investigations. Together, I believe we can unravel this mystery. The way he said "together" made Catherine's heart skip strangely in her chest. She had only met this man hours ago, yet she already felt an inexplicable connection to him, a sense that they were meant to work in tandem on this case. She pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on the urgency of finding Robert. What do we do now? She asked. Now, Harrison said, we take Wellington to Pier 7 and see what he can show us. But I must warn you, Miss Hartwell, the waterfront at night is not a place for a lady. It can be dangerous, particularly in this weather. Perhaps you should return home and let me handle this portion of the investigation alone. Catherine straightened her spine, her green eyes flashing with determination. Absolutely not, Detective Blake. Robert is my neighbor and my friend. Wellington knows and trusts me. And frankly, you may need my help if you find Mr. Fitzgerald injured or in distress. I'm not some delicate flower who wilts at the first sign of difficulty. I'm coming with you. A smile tugged at the corner of Harrison's mouth, and Catherine saw admiration gleam in his blue eyes. I can see that arguing with you would be futile, Miss Hartwell. Very well, but please stay close to me. The docks are a labyrinth, and I wouldn't want to have 2 missing persons on my hands. They left the apartment, locking it securely behind them, and made their way toward the waterfront district. The rain continued its relentless assault, turning the streets into rushing streams that carried debris and refuse toward the harbor. Wellington seemed to sense where they were heading, his pace quickening as they drew closer to the docks. The waterfront was a different world from the genteel streets of Beacon Hill. Here, massive ships loomed in the darkness, their masts swaying like skeletal fingers against the stormy sky. Warehouses lined the piers, their walls streaked with salt and age. The air smelled of fish and tar and the sea, a pungent combination that made Catherine's nose wrinkle. Harrison produced a lantern from beneath his coat and lit it, holding it high to illuminate their path. Pier 7 should be just ahead, he said, his voice barely audible over the sound of rain and waves crashing against the wharf. Wellington suddenly pulled hard on his leash, nearly yanking it from Catherine's grip. The dog was focused on something ahead, his body rigid with attention. Harrison and Catherine exchanged glances and hurried after the retriever. their feet splashing through puddles that reflected the lantern's light like shattered mirrors. Pier 7 was one of the older structures, a long wooden dock that extended out over the dark water. At its far end stood a warehouse, its windows boarded up, its door hanging slightly ajar. Wellington led them directly to this building, whining and pawing at the entrance. "Stay behind me," Harrison instructed, handing Catherine the lantern. He pushed the door open slowly, the hinges protesting with a loud creak that echoed through the empty space within. The warehouse was vast and largely empty, with only a few crates and barrels scattered about. Rain leaked through holes in the roof, creating small pools on the wooden floor. Harrison took the lantern back from Catherine and swept it slowly across the interior, searching for any sign of Robert Fitzgerald. "There!" Catherine gasped, pointing toward the far corner of the warehouse. In the lantern's glow, they could see a figure slumped against the wall. Harrison rushed forward, Catherine and Wellington close behind. As they drew nearer, Catherine's heart sank. It was Robert Fitzgerald, his clothing soaked through, his face pale and drawn. But he was breathing. She could see the slight rise and fall of his chest. "Mr. Fitzgerald!" Catherine cried, dropping to her knees beside him. Wellington began licking his master's face frantically, whimpering with joy and concern. Harrison knelt on Robert's other side, quickly assessing his condition. "He's unconscious but alive. No visible injuries that I can see, but he's dangerously cold. We need to get him to a hospital immediately." Robert's eyes fluttered open at the sound of their voices. He looked confused and disoriented, his gaze moving from Catherine to Harrison to Wellington. "Catherine," he whispered hoarsely. "How did you—" "Wellington got away. I tried to hold on to him, but—" "Don't try to talk," Harrison said gently. "We're going to get you help. Can you tell me what happened here? Who did this to you?" Robert's eyes suddenly widened with fear. "Charles." "It wasn't Charles. It was a trap. They wanted the document. I wouldn't tell them where it was. Locked me in here. So cold." "Who locked you in here, Mr. Fitzgerald?" Harrison pressed, but Robert's eyes had closed again, his head lolling to the side. Harrison wasted no time. He removed his overcoat and wrapped it around Robert, then lifted the older man in his arms as if he weighed nothing at all. Catherine was struck by the detective's strength and the gentleness with which he cradled the injured man. "We need to move quickly," Harrison said. "Miss Hartwell, can you manage Wellington and the lantern?" "Yes, of course." They made their way out of the warehouse and back along the pier, Harrison carrying Robert with steady determination despite the treacherous footing. Catherine held the lantern high, using her free hand to keep Wellington close as they navigated the rain-soaked docks. Her mind was racing with questions. What document had Robert been talking about? Who had set this trap? And where was the real Charles Pemberton? Massachusetts General Hospital stood like a beacon of hope in the stormy night, its windows blazing with light as doctors and nurses tended to the sick and injured. Harrison carried Robert Fitzgerald through the main entrance, his coat still wrapped around the older man, while Catherine and Wellington followed close behind. The warmth of the hospital interior was a stark contrast to the bitter cold outside, and Catherine felt her frozen fingers beginning to tingle painfully as sensation returned to them. A nurse rushed forward immediately, her experienced eyes taking in Robert's condition with a single glance. "This way, quickly," she commanded, leading them to an examination room. Two orderlies appeared with a wheeled stretcher, and Harrison carefully transferred Robert onto it, his concern evident in the furrow of his brow. He was locked in an unheated warehouse for hours, Harrison explained to the attending physician, a distinguished-looking man with silver hair and spectacles. He's suffering from exposure and possible shock. He was conscious briefly and spoke a few words, but then lost consciousness again. The doctor nodded, already beginning his examination. "We'll take care of him. You did well to bring him in when you did. Another few hours in those conditions could have been fatal." He glanced at Catherine and Harrison. "Are you family?" "Friends," Catherine said quickly. "I'm his neighbor, and Detective Blake is investigating his disappearance. Will he be all right, Doctor?" "I believe so, with proper treatment and rest. He's a fortunate man to have friends who care enough to search for him in such weather." The doctor turned to his nurses. "Let's get him warmed slowly and carefully. Blankets, warm broth when he's able to take it, and monitor his vital signs closely." As the medical staff worked efficiently around Robert, Harrison gently took Catherine's elbow and guided her back into the corridor. Wellington whined softly, clearly wanting to stay with his master, but Catherine kept a firm hold on his leash. "He'll be well cared for here," Harrison assured her. Now we need to focus on finding who did this to him and why. Miss Hartwell, I need to ask you something important. In all your conversations with Mr. Fitzgerald, did he ever mention being involved in anything unusual 30 years ago? Any incident, any business venture, anything at all that might connect to what happened today? Catherine thought carefully, searching her memory for any relevant details. He rarely spoke of his past. I know he came to Boston as a young man, that he inherited the bookshop from his father, who had established it years before. He married relatively late in life, and his wife passed away 5 years ago from pneumonia. But of his youth, his friendships, any troubles or adventures, he never mentioned anything specific. Harrison paced the corridor, his mind clearly working through the puzzle pieces they had gathered. A document, he said. They wanted a document, and he wouldn't tell them where it was. What kind of document would be valuable enough to warrant kidnapping and leaving a man to freeze to death? Could it be something related to his bookshop? Catherine suggested. Perhaps a rare manuscript or first edition. Possibly, but I don't think so. This feels more personal, more connected to those 5 young men in that photograph. 5 friends, 30 years ago, and now someone is using Charles Pemberton's name to lure Robert into a trap. Harrison stopped pacing and turned to face Catherine, his blue eyes intense. We need to find out what happened to the real Charles Pemberton and locate the other 3 men from that photograph. James Blackwood, Henry Thornhill, and William Sterling. One of them may know what this is about. A nurse approached them, her expression grave. Excuse me, Detective Blake. Mr.
Fitzgerald is awake again and asking to speak with you. The doctor says you may have a few minutes, but please don't tire him. They returned to the examination room, where Robert lay propped up on pillows, wrapped in heavy blankets. His color had improved slightly, though he still looked frail and exhausted. Wellington immediately pulled toward the bed, and Catherine released the leash, allowing the dog to place his head on the mattress next to his master's hand. Robert's fingers trembled as he stroked the golden fur. Good boy, Robert whispered. You brought them to me, didn't you? Clever boy. Mr. Fitzgerald, Harrison said, pulling a chair close to the bed while Catherine stood at his shoulder. I know you're tired, but this is crucial. Can you tell us exactly what happened this morning? Robert's eyes closed briefly, as if gathering strength. When he spoke, his voice was weak but steady. I received the letter from Charles 3 days ago. It troubled me greatly because Charles Pemberton died 2 years ago. I attended his funeral in New York. When I saw his signature on that letter, I knew something was terribly wrong, but I had to know what this was about. The matter he mentioned, it's something we swore we'd never speak of again. What matter? Harrison leaned forward, his attention completely focused on Robert's words. In the summer of 1874, the 5 of us, Charles, James, Henry, William, and myself, were young men working at the Harrison Shipping Company here in Boston. We were clerks, trusted with the company's ledgers and correspondence. One day, we discovered that the company's owner, Victor Harrison, was involved in illegal activities. He was using his ships to smuggle goods, avoiding customs taxes, and keeping 2 sets of books to hide his profits from his investors and the government. Catherine's breath caught. Harrison's jaw tightened, but he nodded for Robert to continue. We documented everything: dates, amounts, ship names, cargo manifests. We copied the evidence and planned to bring it to the authorities, but Victor Harrison was a powerful man with connections throughout the city. Before we could act, he discovered what we knew. He confronted us in his office, 5 terrified young men facing a man who could destroy our lives with a word. Robert paused, breathing heavily. The nurse stepped forward with concern, but he waved her away weakly. I need to finish this. They need to know. Take your time, Catherine said softly, placing her hand gently on his shoulder. Harrison made us an offer, Robert continued. He would pay each of us $5,000, a fortune in those days, if we would destroy the evidence and never speak of what we had discovered. He said if we refused, he would fabricate evidence that we were the ones embezzling from the company, and we would all go to prison. We were young, frightened, and $5,000 was more money than any of us had ever dreamed of having. So you took the money, Harrison said, his tone neutral and non-judgmental. God help us, we did. We burned most of the evidence in Harrison's office fireplace while he watched. But I kept one document, a ledger page that detailed the most damning transactions. I don't know why I kept it. Insurance, perhaps, or maybe some part of me knew that what we were doing was wrong, and I wanted proof that we had been coerced, not willing participants. And this document is what they were after this morning.
Harrison concluded. Yes. When I arrived at the warehouse, there were 2 men waiting for me. They wore masks, so I couldn't see their faces. They demanded I tell them where the document was hidden. They said they knew I had kept it, that one of the others had betrayed our secret. When I refused to tell them, they locked me in that warehouse. They said I could freeze to death with my secret, and then they would simply search my apartment and bookshop until they found it. Catherine felt anger rising in her chest. How could they be so cruel? You might have died. They didn't care, Robert said bitterly. This document is worth more than my life to someone. But here's what troubles me most. How did they know about it? The 5 of us swore never to speak of this to anyone. If someone betrayed that trust, it means one of my oldest friends has turned against us all. Harrison stood and walked to the window, staring out at the rain-streaked glass. Mr. Fitzgerald, where is this document hidden? In my bookshop, behind a loose brick in the fireplace. It's wrapped in oilcloth and sealed in a metal box. I check on it once a year, on the anniversary of the day we made that terrible choice, just to remind myself of my shame. That shame is misplaced, Harrison said, turning back to face Robert. You were young men being threatened by a powerful, corrupt individual. You did what you felt you had to do to survive. But now we need that document. It's the key to understanding who is behind this attack and why they're willing to commit violence to obtain it. Catherine's mind was racing. Detective Blake, if Victor Harrison was smuggling goods and keeping false books, surely that's a matter of public record. We could research what happened to him, to his company. That might give us a clue about who wants this document now. An excellent suggestion, Miss Hartwell. Harrison's expression showed his approval, and Catherine felt a warm flush of pride at his words. But first, we need to secure that document before anyone else gets to it. Mr. Fitzgerald, may I have your permission to enter your shop and retrieve it? Of course. The shop key is in my apartment, on the hook by the door. Please, detective, be careful. Whoever is behind this has already shown they're willing to harm people to get what they want. I'll be careful, Harrison promised. And I'll make sure this document is kept safe until we can determine the full extent of what we're dealing with. He turned to Catherine. Miss Hartwell, I should escort you home before you go to the bookshop alone? Catherine interrupted, her chin lifting stubbornly. I don't think so, Detective Blake. We're partners in this investigation, remember? Together, you said. Besides, Wellington should stay here with Mr. Fitzgerald tonight, and someone needs to make sure you don't walk into another trap. A smile played at Harrison's lips, despite the seriousness of the situation. You're quite remarkable, Miss Hartwell. Has anyone ever told you that? Not recently, Catherine replied, feeling her cheeks warm under his gaze. But you can tell me again after we've solved this case and ensured Mr. Fitzgerald's safety. They left Wellington with Robert, the faithful dog curling up on the floor beside his master's bed, and made their way back out into the storm. The rain had lessened somewhat, though the wind still howled through the streets with fierce determination. Harrison offered Catherine his arm, and she took it gratefully, appreciating both the support and the warmth of his presence beside her. The streets of Boston were nearly deserted as Catherine and Harrison made their way back toward Beacon Street. The storm had driven everyone indoors, leaving only the sound of rain and their footsteps echoing off the brick buildings that lined the narrow lanes. Catherine found herself acutely aware of Harrison's presence beside her, the strength of his arm beneath her hand, the protective way he guided her around puddles and debris. They retrieved the shop key from Robert's apartment without incident and approached the bookshop with caution. Harrison insisted on entering first, his hand moving to the revolver he kept holstered beneath his coat. But the shop was empty and undisturbed, its shelves of books casting long shadows in the dim light from the street lamps outside. Harrison lit a lamp and moved directly to the fireplace, a modest brick structure built into the back wall. He ran his fingers along the bricks, testing each one methodically until he found the loose stone Robert had described. It came away easily, revealing a small cavity behind it. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth just as Robert had said, was a metal box no larger than a lady's jewelry case. Here it is, Harrison said, carefully extracting the box. He brought it to the shop counter and unwrapped it slowly. The box was locked, but Robert had given them a small key from his pocket watch chain. Harrison turned the key, and the lid opened with a soft click. Inside lay a single yellowed ledger page covered in neat columns of handwriting and figures. Catherine leaned close to Harrison as they examined it together, her shoulder brushing against his. The document detailed shipments on 3 of Victor Harrison's vessels, the Seabird, the Merchant's Pride, and the Elizabeth Rose. Each entry showed two sets of numbers: the official cargo value declared to customs and the actual value of the smuggled goods concealed within legitimate shipments. The difference was staggering: hundreds of thousands of dollars in avoided taxes and duties. "This is explosive," Harrison said quietly. "Even 30 years later, this document proves systematic fraud on a massive scale. But Victor Harrison is long dead, surely. Why would anyone care about this now?" "Unless," Catherine said thoughtfully, "the consequences extend beyond Victor Harrison himself. Detective Blake, what if he had partners? What if other prominent families in Boston were involved in his schemes? Their descendants would have every reason to want this evidence destroyed." Harrison's eyes met hers, and she saw excitement and admiration flash in their blue depths. "Miss Hartwell, you have a brilliant mind." "That's exactly right. We need to research the Harrison Shipping Company and discover who else might have benefited from these illegal activities." "The newspaper archives," Catherine suggested. "The Boston Herald maintains records going back decades. If we go there first thing in the morning—" "No," Harrison interrupted gently. "If we go there now. The Herald's night editor is an old friend of mine. He'll give us access to the archives even at this hour. Time is critical, Miss Hartwell. Whoever sent those men after Robert won't stop simply because they failed once. We need to identify our adversary before they strike again." Catherine nodded, though exhaustion was beginning to pull at her limbs. She had been awake since dawn, and the events of the day had been both physically and emotionally draining. But she wouldn't abandon this investigation now, not when they were so close to answers. They secured the document carefully in Harrison's coat pocket and made their way to the offices of the Boston Herald on Washington Street. The building was ablaze with light despite the late hour, as the morning edition was being prepared for printing. The clatter of the printing press created a rhythmic thunder that Catherine could feel in her bones. Harrison's friend, a thin man named Gerald Price with ink-stained fingers and sharp, intelligent eyes, greeted them warmly despite their bedraggled appearance. When Harrison explained what they needed, Gerald led them to a back room lined floor to ceiling with bound volumes of past newspapers. "Victor Harrison," Gerald mused, running his finger along the spines until he found the volumes from the 1870s. "Oh yes, I remember reading about him when I first started here. Shipping magnate died in 1876 under somewhat mysterious circumstances. Fell from his horse during a storm, they said, but there were whispers of suicide. His company collapsed shortly after, debts and scandals emerging like rats from a sinking ship. He pulled down several volumes and laid them on a reading table. Here, these should have what you need. I'll leave you to your research. Lock up when you're finished. You know where the key goes, Harrison." As Gerald departed, Catherine and Harrison bent over the newspapers, searching through the yellowed pages for any mention of Victor Harrison and his associates. It was slow, painstaking work, but gradually a picture began to emerge. Victor Harrison had indeed died in 1876, just 2 years after Robert and his friends had accepted his bribe. His shipping company had been dissolved, its assets sold to pay creditors. But more interesting were the names that appeared in connection with the company's board of directors and major investors. "Look at this," Catherine said, pointing to an article dated March 1876. Victor Harrison's primary business partner was a man named Cornelius Blackwood. And here, she flipped through several more pages. When the company collapsed, Cornelius Blackwood managed to distance himself from the scandal. He claimed he had no knowledge of any illegal activities and had been merely a silent investor. "Blackwood," Harrison repeated, then grabbed the photograph they had taken from Robert's apartment. James Blackwood was one of the 5 friends. Could Cornelius be related to him? His father, perhaps, Catherine suggested. If James Blackwood's father was Victor Harrison's partner, and James discovered the smuggling scheme while working as a clerk, it would have put him in a terrible position. Exposing Harrison would have meant exposing his own father. Harrison's expression was grim. And if Cornelius Blackwood knew that his son possessed evidence of his crimes, he would have every reason to want that document destroyed, even decades later. "But Cornelius would be quite elderly now if he's even still alive," Catherine pointed out. "Then perhaps his heirs are continuing his work," Harrison said. "We need to find out what happened to the Blackwood family after the company collapsed, and we need to locate James Blackwood himself. He may be in danger, or—" Harrison's voice grew hard. "He may be the one who betrayed the others." They continued searching through the archives, and what they discovered painted a disturbing picture. Cornelius Blackwood had died in 1898, but he had left behind a considerable fortune despite his company's collapse, suggesting he had indeed profited from the illegal activities and hidden his wealth successfully. His estate had passed to his son James, who had used the inheritance to establish himself as a respectable businessman in Boston society. James Blackwood is still alive, Catherine read from an article dated just 3 months earlier. He's now a prominent banker, serves on numerous charitable boards, and is considered one of Boston's most distinguished citizens. His reputation is spotless, built on a foundation of smuggling profits and hush money, Harrison said bitterly. And now, 30 years later, something has threatened to expose that foundation. The question is, what triggered this? Why now? Catherine flipped through more recent newspapers, searching for anything that might provide a clue. Then she found it, a small announcement in the society pages from 2 weeks prior. Detective Blake, look at this. James Blackwood's daughter is engaged to be married to Senator Thomas Whitfield's son. The wedding is planned for next month. Senator Whitfield is being mentioned as a possible candidate for governor. Understanding dawned in Harrison's eyes. And if evidence emerged that the Blackwood fortune was built on criminal activities, it would destroy not only James Blackwood's reputation, but also his daughter's engagement and the senator's political career. The stakes couldn't be higher. So James Blackwood sent those men to recover the document from Robert, Catherine concluded. He's trying to erase the last evidence of his father's crimes and his own complicity in covering them up. We need to confront him, Harrison said, but carefully. A man in his position has resources and connections. We need to be smart about this. He checked his pocket watch. It's nearly 3 in the morning. James Blackwood will be home, asleep. We'll go to his residence at dawn, before he has a chance to learn that Robert is safe and the document is no longer in his bookshop. Catherine wanted to protest, to suggest they go immediately, but exhaustion and common sense prevailed. Where should we wait until dawn? Harrison looked at her for a long moment, and Catherine saw something shift in his expression, a tenderness that made her heart race. Miss Hartwell, you've been extraordinary tonight. Your courage, your intelligence, your determination. I've never met anyone quite like you. But you're exhausted, and I won't have you collapse from fatigue. My apartment is not far from here. It's not entirely proper, I know, but given the circumstances, I think we can be forgiven for bending social conventions. You can rest for a few hours while I keep watch and plan our approach to Blackwood. Catherine knew she should refuse, should insist on returning to her own home despite the late hour and dangerous circumstances, but something in Harrison's eyes, in the gentleness of his voice, made her trust him completely. Thank you, Detective Blake. I accept your kind offer. They walked through the now quiet streets to Harrison's apartment, a modest but comfortable set of rooms on the 3rd floor of a well-maintained building. He lit a fire in the small fireplace to chase away the chill, then insisted Catherine take his bedroom while he settled into an armchair in the sitting room with the case files spread before him. But Catherine found she couldn't sleep despite her exhaustion. Her mind kept returning to everything they had discovered, and to the man in the next room who had shown her such respect and partnership. After an hour of tossing and turning, she rose and returned to the sitting room, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. Harrison looked up from his papers as she entered, concern crossing his handsome features. Can't sleep? Too much racing through my mind, Catherine admitted, settling into the chair across from him. Detective Blake, may I ask you something personal? I wish you would call me Harrison, he said with a slight smile. Given everything we've been through tonight, I think we've earned the right to some familiarity. And yes, ask me anything. Why did you become a detective? What draws you to solving these mysteries, to helping people like Robert? Harrison leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant. My father was a police officer, a good man, honest and dedicated to justice. When I was 12 years old, he was investigating a case of corruption within the department itself, officers taking bribes, looking the other way while crimes were committed. He was getting close to exposing the truth when he was killed. They said it was an accident, that he fell down the stairs at the station. But I knew better. I always knew better. Catherine's heart ached for the boy he had been, for the injustice he had witnessed. I'm so sorry, Harrison. I became a detective to finish his work, Harrison continued, to seek truth and justice for those who have been wronged, to expose corruption wherever I find it. Cases like Robert's, they're why I do this. A good man, threatened and harmed by someone more powerful, Someone who thinks they can act with impunity because of their wealth and position. I won't let James Blackwood get away with this. We won't let him, Catherine corrected softly. We're partners in this, remember? Harrison's eyes met hers across the firelit room, and Catherine felt something profound pass between them. It was more than attraction, more than the camaraderie born of shared danger. It was a recognition of kindred spirits, of two people who valued justice and compassion and truth. Catherine, Harrison said, her name sounding almost like a prayer on his lips. When this is over, when Robert is safe and justice has been served, I would very much like to continue our partnership. In whatever form you'll allow. Catherine's breath caught, but before she could respond, the clock on the mantel chimed 5 times. Dawn was approaching. It was time to finish what they had started. They prepared carefully for their confrontation with James Blackwood. Harrison checked his revolver, though he hoped he wouldn't need to use it. Catherine insisted on accompanying him, and Harrison no longer tried to dissuade her. They had become a team, and he trusted her judgment and courage completely. James Blackwood's residence was a magnificent townhouse on Commonwealth Avenue, 3 stories of brick and marble that spoke of wealth and power. They arrived just as the sky was beginning to lighten in the east, the storm finally having blown itself out during the night. Harrison rang the bell firmly, and after a few moments, a butler answered, his expression disapproving of visitors at such an early hour. Detective Harrison Blake to see Mr. James Blackwood. Tell him it concerns Robert Fitzgerald and a certain document from 1874. I believe he'll see us immediately. The butler's eyes widened slightly, but he maintained his professional composure. Please wait here. They were shown into a lavish study within minutes. James Blackwood entered moments later, a tall man in his early 50s with silver-streaked dark hair and eyes that were both intelligent and wary. He wore a burgundy dressing gown over his nightclothes, and his face was composed but pale. Detective Blake, he said coolly, I assume this early morning visit means you've been busy tonight. Where is Robert? Safe, Harrison replied. In hospital, recovering from exposure after being locked in a warehouse by 2 men who were attempting to extort information from him. Men you sent, Mr. Blackwood. I have no idea what you're talking about, James said, but his voice lacked conviction. Harrison produced the ledger page from his coat. This is what they were after. Evidence of smuggling and fraud committed by Victor Harrison and your father, Cornelius Blackwood, in 1874. Evidence that 5 young men, including yourself and Robert Fitzgerald, were bribed to conceal. Evidence that proves your family fortune is built on criminal proceeds. James Blackwood's face went even paler. He sank into a chair behind his desk, suddenly looking much older than his years. How did you? Robert should have destroyed that years ago. We all promised. Robert kept it as insurance. Catherine spoke up. A wise decision, as it turns out. Your men could have killed him last night, Mr. Blackwood. An innocent man, your old friend, left to freeze to death. How could you? I didn't know they would go that far, James said, his voice breaking. I hired them to recover the document to frighten Robert into giving it up. I never authorized violence. You have to believe me. What I believe, Harrison said sternly, is that you panicked when you learned of your daughter's engagement. You knew that if this evidence came to light, it would destroy everything you've built. Your reputation, your daughter's future, your prospective son-in-law's political career. So you betrayed the trust of your oldest friends to protect yourself. It wasn't just about me, James protested. My daughter is innocent. She's done nothing wrong. Why should she suffer for sins committed before she was even born? And the senator's family, they're good people. I couldn't let this destroy them all. So you decided Robert's life was an acceptable sacrifice? Catherine's voice was cold with anger. James buried his face in his hands. I didn't know what else to do. 2 months ago, I received a letter, unsigned, untraceable. It claimed to know about the document Robert kept, about what we had done 30 years ago. It demanded $50,000, or the sender would expose everything. I've been paying, but the demands keep coming. I thought if I could just get the document back, destroy the evidence, it would end. Someone was blackmailing you, Harrison said, his detective's mind immediately grasping the implications. Who? Who knew about the document besides the 5 of you? That's what terrifies me, James said. Charles is dead. Robert would never betray us. That leaves Henry Thornhill and William Sterling. I tried to contact them both to warn them, but Henry died last year of heart failure, and William William moved to California 20 years ago and never responded to my letters. Harrison and Catherine exchanged glances. Someone else knew, Harrison said. Or one of the 5 of you told someone before they died. Mr. Blackwood, I need the blackmail letters. All of them. James opened a desk drawer and produced a bundle of letters, his hands shaking. Harrison examined them carefully. They were written in block letters, deliberately disguised, and posted from different locations around Boston. These are the work of someone systematic and intelligent, Harrison observed. Someone who understands how to cover their tracks. But they made one mistake. He held up the most recent letter to the light. This paper has a watermark. It's expensive stationery from Pemberton's fine papers on Newbury Street. Only a few dozen people in Boston could afford to buy this regularly. I can get a list of their customers, Catherine said excitedly. The owner, Mrs. Pemberton, is a customer at my flower shop. I've done arrangements for her store's anniversary parties. She trusts me. Then we have our next lead, Harrison said. He turned back to James Blackwood with a stern expression. Mr. Blackwood, you will turn yourself into the police and confess to hiring those men to threaten Robert Fitzgerald. You will also provide a full written statement about the events of 1874. In exchange, I'll speak to the district attorney about leniency given your cooperation and the fact that your crimes were committed under blackmail pressure. But my daughter's engagement, my reputation. Your reputation is built on lies and criminal proceeds, Harrison interrupted firmly. It's time to face the consequences of your choices. However, if you cooperate fully, and if the person blackmailing you is brought to justice, I believe we can keep the details of the 1874 case quiet. The statute of limitations has long since expired on those crimes. The focus will be on the recent assault on Robert Fitzgerald and the blackmail scheme. Your daughter's future need not be destroyed if you do the right thing now. James looked between Harrison and Catherine, seeing no mercy in their eyes but perhaps a chance at redemption. Very well, he said quietly. I'll do as you ask. I'm tired of living with this secret. Tired of being afraid. Whatever punishment I receive, it can't be worse than the prison I've been living in for 30 years. Within the hour, James Blackwood had been taken into custody and had provided a full confession. But Harrison's work wasn't finished. He and Catherine spent the rest of the morning at Pemberton's fine papers, where Mrs. Pemberton, charmed by Catherine and impressed by Harrison's credentials, provided them with a list of her regular customers who purchased that particular line of stationery. One name on the list made them both stop and stare. Henry Thornhill, Jr. Henry Thornhill died last year, Catherine said, but he had a son. They rushed to the address Mrs. Pemberton had provided, a modest apartment in the South End. A young man in his late 20s answered the door, his eyes widening when he saw Harrison's badge. Mr. Thornhill, Harrison said, we need to speak with you about the blackmail letters you've been sending to James Blackwood. Henry Thornhill, Jr. didn't even try to deny it. He sagged against the door frame, all the fight draining out of him. How did you know? The stationery was your first mistake, Harrison said. But there were others. May we come in? Inside the shabby apartment, Henry told them his story. His father had confessed everything on his deathbed, the smuggling, the bribe, the secret document Robert had kept. Henry Jr., struggling with debts and resentment toward the wealthy men who had built their fortunes while his father had squandered the bribe money on bad investments, had seen an opportunity for revenge and profit. I never meant for anyone to get hurt, he said miserably. I just wanted to make them pay for their comfortable lives while I struggled. When James hired those men to go after Robert, I realized how far things had spiraled out of control. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Harrison arrested Henry Thornhill, Jr. for extortion, but there was a sadness in his eyes as he did so. Another life ruined by the sins of the past. Another victim of greed and bad choices made decades ago. By evening, all the pieces had fallen into place. Robert Fitzgerald was recovering well in hospital, with Wellington lying faithfully by his bed. James Blackwood and Henry Thornhill, Jr. were in custody, facing justice for their crimes. The ledger page had been secured as evidence, though Harrison had quietly indicated to the district attorney that the historical smuggling charges need not be pursued, given the time elapsed and the cooperation of those involved. Harrison and Catherine stood outside the hospital as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The storm had passed completely, leaving the air fresh and clean. It's over, Catherine said softly. We did it. You did it, Harrison corrected. Your observations about Wellington's pause, your insight about the Blackwood family connections, your courage in accompanying me despite the danger. You were essential to solving this case, Catherine. She turned to face him, her green eyes bright with emotion. We were partners, she said, just as you promised we would be. Harrison reached out and gently took her hand, no longer caring about propriety or convention. Catherine Hartwell, I meant what I said last night. I would very much like to continue our partnership. I've never met anyone like you. Your intelligence, your compassion, your bravery. You've shown me what it means to have a true equal working beside me. Will you allow me to court you properly, to see if this partnership might become something even more? Catherine's heart soared. In the span of just one day and night, her life had transformed completely. She had helped solve a mystery, saved a friend's life, and found something she hadn't even known she was searching for. A man who saw her as an equal, who valued her mind as much as her beauty, who wanted her by his side not despite her strength but because of it. Yes, she said, her smile radiant. Yes, Harrison Blake, I would like that very much indeed. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently, a promise of more to come. Around them, Boston bustled with its evening activities, people hurrying home to their families, gas lamps beginning to glow in windows all across the city. But for Catherine and Harrison, the world had narrowed to just this moment, this connection, this beginning of something beautiful. 2 weeks later, Robert Fitzgerald hosted a small dinner party in his apartment to celebrate his full recovery. Catherine arrived with an enormous bouquet from her shop, and Harrison arrived with Wellington, who had been staying with him during Robert's convalescence and had become quite attached to the detective. As they sat around the table sharing good food and laughter, Robert raised his glass. To Detective Blake and Miss Hartwell, he said, his eyes warm with gratitude and affection, for their courage, their brilliance, and their partnership. You saved my life, and you've given me back my peace. Wellington and I are forever in your debt. To Catherine and Harrison, the others echoed, and Catherine felt Harrison's hand find hers beneath the table, squeezing gently. Later, as Harrison walked Catherine home through streets now familiar with their shared history, he stopped under a gas lamp and turned to face her. I have something to tell you, he said, his expression serious but his eyes dancing with happiness. The department has asked me to take on more complex cases, investigations that require not just detective work, but analysis and research. I said I would accept on one condition, that I be allowed to hire a consulting investigator to work with me. Someone brilliant and brave, someone who sees details others miss, someone who has already proven herself invaluable. Catherine's breath caught. Harrison, are you saying? I'm saying that I want you as my partner, Catherine, in every sense of the word, in work, in life, in all the adventures that lie ahead of us. I know it's soon. I know we've only known each other a short time, but I've never been more certain of anything. Catherine Hartwell, will you marry me? Tears of joy sprang to Catherine's eyes. Yes, she whispered. Yes, 1,000 times, yes. He pulled her into his arms, and under the soft glow of the gas lamp, surrounded by the city they had protected together, Harrison Blake kissed Catherine Hartwell for the first time. It was a kiss full of promise and passion, of partnership and love, of all the mysteries they would solve together, and all the life they would build side by side. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless and smiling, Catherine laughed softly. You know, when Wellington came back without Robert that day, I never imagined it would lead to all of this. That's the thing about mysteries, Harrison said, tucking a strand of her auburn hair behind her ear. You never know where they'll lead, but I'm grateful this one led me to you. And as they walked home together through the Boston night, hand in hand, both knew that this was just the beginning of their greatest adventure, a lifetime of partnership, love, and justice together.